Materials and shaders. Half-Life 2 came out in the midst of a significant shift in 3D graphics, where the industry moved from textures to materials and shaders. In Half-Life 1, every surface had a texture, essentially an image wrapped onto the polygons of the surface. But by Half-Life 2, just 5 years later, every surface had both a material and a shader. The shader was a lump of code that customized how the surface was rendered. The material defined properties for how the surface behaved physically and how it responded to gameplay features. It also held references to textures and other parameters for the shader to use for rendering. As a result, artists and designers had much more control over how things looked and behaved. However, this came with a trade-off. Half-Life 1 could run on a computer with only a CPU, but Half-Life 2 required a GPU because the computations needed for materials and shaders were specifically designed for GPU hardware. The refracting glass door here is a clear example of a custom shader, but every surface in the scene is actually running a shader of some kind.
Cubemaps. With the addition of materials and shaders, we needed a solution for reflective surfaces like glass and steel. These surfaces had to know what to reflect, but in 2003 we couldn't do any of that rendering in real time, so we developed the Cubemap system for pre-computed reflections. A Cubemap is a set of 6 images on the inside of a cube, capturing the environment in every direction, like a panoramic photo that surrounds you on all sides. Level designers placed invisible marker entities throughout the levels, and during map compilation, we generate a cube map at each marker. Then, during gameplay, when rendering a reflective surface, we locate the nearest pre-computed cube map to create the reflection.
Hey, Doc.
Field of view. In Half-Life 1, we used a 90-degree field of view, or FOV, which was fairly standard for first-person shooters at the time. But during Half-Life 2's development, we grew unhappy with it. With our game's focus on characters, we'd put extensive effort into detailed facial and body animations. But the 90-degree FOV just didn't allow players to get close enough to fully appreciate that detail. So we began experimenting with a tighter FOV, and ultimately landed on 75 degrees. It took some adjustment for both us and players, and it required an additional FOV for view models, which are the player's weapon, held at the bottom of the screen. Their models were originally built with 90 degrees in mind, so they looked distorted at 75. But this change succeeded in doing what we wanted, putting our characters front and center in the game.
Oh, I thought you were a cop.
He's one of us.
Look at him down there.
I told you they'd be coming for us next.
Just this once, I hope you're wrong.
Reference maps. As our characters grew more lifelike between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2, we wanted the game world to feel equally realistic. In Half-Life 1, the limitations of first-person games often made it easier to lean on stylized or abstracted environments. But with Half-Life 2, we set out to create a setting that felt grounded in reality, which meant focusing on a lot of small details we hadn't before. One of our main steps was creating reference maps to standardize how we'd map real-world proportions into the game. These maps establish details like wall and door dimensions, doorknob heights, interior lighting, furniture scale, and the general scale of common objects. We created standardized textures for level designers, complete with scale and lighting values. The layouts would be consistent from the start. Besides setting up the physical world, these reference maps defined how the player would move through it, how high they could jump, how low they could duck, and the size of spaces like vents. Using these maps as foundation, we were able to keep our world geometry consistent and ensure realistically sized spaces across the game.
take it anymore.
Everything's gonna be okay.
What are we going to do?
We'll think of something.
When is it all going to end?
Don't worry.
Please.
It's all right.
I find it helpful at times like these to remind myself that our true enemy is instinct.
Missing material. Early on in developing our low-level graphics code, we realized it would be difficult to spot polygons that weren't rendering due to a missing texture. When this happened, you'd typically just see black where the polygon should be, which could easily go unnoticed in darker scenes. To catch this bug more reliably, we created an error texture that would be visually unmistakable and generated automatically whenever a texture failed to load. This gave rise to the now iconic purple and black checkerboard texture, which has since taken on a life of its own well beyond Half-Life 2.
The raid. The section ahead, where the Metro cops raid the apartment while the player is inside, took a lot of iteration to get right. Generally, we design Half-Life to let players set their own pace, since people move through the game in a variety of ways. Some players run, ignoring anything that doesn't seem like a threat, while others methodically poke at everything. So, whenever we need to force a specific pace, it's always a challenge to ensure players perceive that pace and naturally play along. Since this is the first time we do this, we had to put in a lot of work to make it clear to the player that they needed to move quickly, and there's no time for exploration here.
Psst, hey you! In here!
The Raid 2. In addition to making sure the player felt the pressure to move forward, we had to ensure the raid itself was foolproof. There couldn't be any way for the player to avoid it or double back past the Metro cops. The real challenge wasn't that players would try to break the scene, but that many would panic and run in random directions once they realized they were under threat for the first time. This moment requires a delicate balance. We wanted a heart-pounding escape, the sense of real danger, but we wanted players to make it through on their first try and feel like they escaped by the skin of their teeth. To achieve this, we kept the path ahead clear and reminiscent to the one they had just taken through the previous floor. A series of carefully placed triggers controls the threats appearing ahead and behind, maintaining the pressure while still giving players enough time to stay ahead of their pursuers.
Head for the roof! There's no time to lose!
Identification check in progress. Please assemble in your designated section position.
Get in here, quick! Keep moving! Head for the roof!
All citizens in local
Health and no HUD. The rooftop chase sequence posed a unique design challenge. We didn't want it to be a true gameplay obstacle, and our best case was for players to make it through on their first try. But we still wanted to create the sense of real danger, where players felt legitimately threatened if they didn't keep moving. The challenge was that without the HEV suit, players don't technically have a heads-up display or HUD, which means no way to show damage or remaining health. After some experimenting, we created a special health system for this section, using a red glow around the screen to indicate damage. Players reacted as we hoped, taking it as a sign to keep moving, and the chase unfolded as intended. To top it off, we made health regenerate quickly so the glow wouldn't linger, reinforcing to players that running was indeed the right choice, and ensuring players weren't taken down by a stray bullet at the end just because they dawdled or hesitated earlier on.
Playtesting Anecdote 2. In the upcoming section, we needed the player to be knocked down so Alyx could save them. With limited time and resources, we simplified the encounter as much as possible, reusing existing systems and letting it play out like a normal combat sequence, with a custom event triggered when the player died. After a few playtests to fine-tune the timing, we moved on. But as we got close to shipping, we encountered a problem with a playtester who quick-saved constantly and immediately hit quick-load whenever they thought they'd failed. When a Metro Cop hit them, they quick-loaded before Alyx could step in, repeating this more than 10 times before we asked them to stop. At this stage of development, in the final bug-fixing phase, we had to limit ourselves to fixing only game-breaking issues, since even small changes could risk breaking something more important. Knowing this was a rare edge case, because most players had no trouble, we made a few conservative changes. We shortened the delay between the knockdown and Alyx's first line and changed the fade-out color to white instead of black, which wasn't ultimately that useful since players hadn't died enough yet to associate black with death. We considered disabling quick load for the few seconds that the scene plays out, but we were worried that could introduce a bug where quick load became disabled permanently.
No, you don't! Dr. Freeman, I presume. I better hurry. The Combine can be slow to wake, but once they're up, you don't want to get in their way. Dr. Kleiner said you'd be coming this way. I don't think it occurred to him that you might not have a map.
Alyx. Nailing Alyx's design was a big challenge. We wanted the player to both respect and care for her. Saving Eli was a key player goal midway through the game, and we knew that getting players to care about that goal would be easier if they also cared about Alyx and her relationship with her father. We intentionally designed, wrote dialogue, and cast a voice actor for Alyx to be savvy, capable, and relatable within the Combine-controlled world, while also making her attractive and charismatic. We aimed to avoid the objectification, exaggeration, and hypersexuality that many games of the 2000s featured, as we felt that would undermine our goals for her character.
This way, Mom. I'm Alyx Vance. My father worked with you back in Black Mesa. I'm sure you don't remember me, though. Man, a few words, aren't you?
NPCs on elevators. We often spend a significant amount of time solving problems that players might not even notice. Many of these are subtle design challenges, while others stem from multiple systems interacting with each other. For example, getting non-player characters to ride in elevators posed a complex problem because it involved various systems, NPC AI decision-making, navigation planning, and movement simulation, to name a few. Additionally, the elevator itself had its own simulation requirements unrelated to NPCs. One of the more subtle challenges came from the fact that we simulate NPCs at a slower rate than we simulate elevators. This meant that NPCs on a descending elevator would simulate to make sure they were properly standing on the elevator, and then the elevator would simulate a few times, each time moving further down the elevator shaft, subtly leaving the NPC behind. Shortly after that, the NPC would simulate a second time and pop itself down on the elevator floor once again. You can imagine that it was hard to take Alyx seriously when she was constantly falling down in small increments while talking to you.
Interactive storytelling. When we started on Half-Life 2, storytelling in games was generally either high fidelity and linear or low fidelity and interactive. We knew players had seen high-quality storytelling in games, but they'd never been placed right in the middle of it, able to watch it unfold around them, interact with it, and examine any part closely. While that goal excited us, we didn't yet know how it would work or what kind of technology we'd need to make it happen. We had built a variety of storytelling technology in Half-Life 1, but it was mostly presented in front of the player and lacked the interactivity and fidelity we were aiming for. So Kleiner's lab became the section of the game we used as a testbed to figure out how our interactive storytelling would actually function.
Funny you showing up on this day in particular. We've been helping people escape the city on foot. It's a dangerous route to my father's lab, through the old canals. Today, we're finally on the verge of having a better way.
Kleiner's lab. Kleiner's lab was the first piece of storytelling we worked on, and the one that took the longest to figure out. In addition to its role in launching the player into the game, it eventually became the unifying vision for the development team in terms of storytelling. As we began building our characters and narrative delivery around the player, many questions arose, all of which felt like major risks for the game. Would players be able to extract the important information from the scene? Could we get them to care about these characters? How would we support players with varying levels of investment in the story? How costly would it be to produce a scene like this? And how many more would we need? These and many more were questions we couldn't answer until we'd built enough of the scene and tested it with a lot of playtesters. Frustratingly, unlike many other problems we face, these weren't questions we could confidently answer until we had done significant work. We can often test gameplay ideas with low-fidelity prototypes, but if a player isn't invested in our storytelling when the characters are just gray blocks, how confident can we be that they'll care once the characters are fully realized?
Choreography. The system we built and iterated on to deliver Half-Life 2's storytelling was internally called Choreo, short for choreography. Early on, we found it useful to imagine we were writing a play where one of the actors didn't know the script. We needed a system that could control all the other actors, moving them around the stage, delivering their performances and speaking their lines. To handle this, the other actors would need to seamlessly mix our directorial commands with dynamic responses to the player's position and behavior. Timing was clearly going to be a major challenge, as any part of the scene might need to lengthen, contract, or even pause, depending on what the player was doing.
Here, let me buy you a drink. Oh, and by the way, nice to finally meet you.
FacePoser. The primary tool we built to power the Choreo system was called FacePoser, an inaccurately named program that allowed our animators to lay out the entire structure of our scenes along a timeline. The timeline contained a series of Choreo commands for the actors, along with all the necessary information for them to perform those commands. By layering these commands on the timeline, animators could easily describe how an actor might need to face one thing while talking towards another and walk to a different location, all at the same time. But the timeline wasn't a fixed linear sequence. Actors would follow their commands, but they had to respond dynamically to the world around them. An actor might take longer to move to a location if the player is in the way, or they might need to wait to deliver a line because another actor has been delayed by the player. FacePoser allowed us to rapidly iterate on scenes, trying different layouts, dialogue deliveries, and timings. This ability to quickly experiment and adjust proved critical in finding the right performances to achieve our character and narrative goals. Choreo commands. This debug visualization shows the two most common Choreo commands actors receive throughout a scene, internally known as look-ats and move-tos. Actors are given targets to look at, sometimes more than one at a time, and then try to focus on the one that makes the most sense given their current state. At the same time, they might be receiving move-to commands, which tell them to move to a location and face a specific direction or object. Even these seemingly simple commands involved a lot of complexity. A scene might require an actor to talk while typing on a keyboard, all while looking at an object the player is holding. Since we couldn't predict where the player would be during playback, authoring scenes like this required us to break each element of the scene into separate pieces and layers. These could then be reassembled as needed during playback, based on the player's actions and interrupted if necessary.
We can't keep him here long, Doc. It'll jeopardize everything we've worked for.
Don't worry, he's coming with me.
That's right, Barney. This is a red letter day. We'll inaugurate the new teleport with a double transmission.
You mean it's working? For real this time? Because I still have nightmares about that cat.
No, there's nothing to be nervous about.
What cat?
We've made major strides since then. Major strides.
What cat?
Doc, since he's not taking the streets, you might as well get him out of his civvies.
What? Oh dear, you're right. I almost forgot. Barney, I'll give you the honor.
I've got to get back on my shift, but okay. Here we go. Ah! Damn it, get it off me!
Lamar, there you are.
I thought you got rid of that pest.
Certainly not. Never fear.
Writing. In the Half-Life 1 era, player goals in FPS games were still largely about fighting and defeating an obviously evil enemy. It was hard to get players to care about characters when they were as low fidelity as they were in Half-Life 1. With the planned improvements in character fidelity for Half-Life 2, we wanted to take a shot at making characters the driving force of the narrative. Our goal was for the player's motivations to align with those of our characters, for the player to care about these people, their hopes and fears, and to want them to succeed. With this in mind, we were able to assemble our approach to character and dialogue. We would create a set of characters who liked and cared about each other, hoping that the player would feel the same. These characters would interact in a way that felt inclusive, like a group of old friends who see the player as one of them, just someone who's been away for a while. If the characters demonstrated realistic emotional connections with each other, we believed we could build an emotional connection with the player as well.
Don't worry, I won't look.
Voice actors. To create more responsive and multidimensional characters in Half-Life 2, we needed to evolve our approach to working with voice actors. While running through a script with a modicum of direction was sufficient for much of the NPC dialogue for Half-Life 1, for Half-Life 2 we decided to give the actors more of an opportunity to be involved in helping to define the characters and bring them to life. We provided much more story context to the actors, showing them the game world, the environments their characters inhabited, and the other characters they interacted with. We sought actors who could take all that information and synthesize it into their performances to elevate their characters beyond what we had imagined. We held multiple sessions with the main actors, allowing them to digest and build upon their characters over time. For scenes where characters are interacting with each other, we'd often cue an actor with performances from other actors in the scene to create a better sense of connection and flow. Though we'd arrive at the studio with a script and a plan for the recording session, we made sure that the actors felt empowered and had the space to bring their own ideas to the character and performances. Having animators attend the voiceover sessions also proved critical, as they were responsible for stitching the characters' dialogue together with physical actions and expressions to form the resulting choreo scene. Often, animators found that their plans for how a scene would play out evolved quite a bit after working with the voice actor.
Well, Gordon, go ahead. Slip into your suit now.
Delivery. It took a lot of iteration and playtesting to strike the right balance of information and emotional connection in our major choreo scenes. Each scene had a lot of information we needed to convey to the player, but we couldn't just have characters spouting exposition. Players would start thinking of them more as signposts than as people. We needed to take the time to let the characters interact with each other, allowing the player to observe the relationships. At the same time, we had to expand upon the world giving the player a sense of everything that had happened while they were gone. All this had to be done carefully, without taking too long. We wanted the game to work for players who were less invested in the narrative. Animation became a powerful tool in communicating the emotional connections between characters, often conveying the depth of a moment quickly without overstating it. Humor was another commonly used tool, helping to puncture a setup and disarm the player when things got a bit too heavy.
Lab interactivity. In our choreo scenes, we have the player trapped for a bit, allowing us to focus on the characters and narrative. To accommodate different players, some deeply invested in the story, others unable to stand still for more than a second, we felt like we needed a constant stream of interesting details on screen. We scattered narrative elements throughout the environment, ensuring some were interactive, essentially toys for the player to tinker with. In some cases, we embedded further storytelling into these, like the cactus mini-teleporter hinting at the upcoming teleporter failure. It was a delicate balance. Too much visual interest could distract players from the core of the scene. Ultimately, Kleiner's lab played it safe with interactivity, as it was the first major choreo scene. Later, in Eli's lab, we explored it more deeply, ensuring the characters themselves paid attention to what the players were tinkering with.
Archetypes. We wanted to create narrative links between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 through our characters. Our idea was to design individuals who felt like representations of Half-Life 1's archetypes, so that players might find them familiar, almost as though they'd met them in Half-Life 1 at some point that they couldn't quite remember. We based Dr. Kleiner on the scientist model we felt was the most iconic, and his personality was largely shaped by Hal Robbins, whose voice and performances had defined the Half-Life 1 scientists. One day, when we were in the thick of trying to figure out this character, Dr. Kleiner's face came into focus as we happened to share an elevator with an accountant from an office on another floor of our building, and looking at him, it was clear that this is Dr. Kleiner's face. Luckily, he was receptive when we asked if we could photograph him for a video game character.
Let's get a move on.
Character reactions. Figuring out what characters should react to and how was an ongoing challenge. At the core, we always want the game to respond to player input. However, any response from the game can be seen as a reward by the player. So, what characters react to and what they ignore teaches the player about the kind of input the game expects. As a result, we made sure to respond to things we wanted more of, like players tinkering with devices in the lab, and ignored behaviors we wanted less of, like players repeatedly slapping Kleiner in the face with a box over and over again. Seriously, we watched a playtester do it for 5 minutes straight.
Animation. Constructing believable human motion for our characters out of many discrete layers of animation required a lot of technological iteration. Even simple actions like turning to look at something or walking to a location became more complex when combined with the need to dynamically respond to the player and the requirements of choreo commands. For example, turning to look at something had to be fully decomposed, allowing a character to use any combination of its eyes, head, shoulders, upper torso, or full body to face a target. In Half-Life 1, human characters had their bodies separated into upper and lower halves, allowing them to walk in one direction while facing another. However, this approach was too abstract for Half-Life 2's characters. Instead, our animators created walking animations in all 8 directions of the compass, which could then be smoothly blended together at runtime.
Tone. Setting the right tone for our characters and their dialogue was critical. We aimed for a respectful, almost pleasant style of interaction with the player, while avoiding anything that felt too subservient. This balance was especially tricky with Alyx, who needed to support the player without compromising the strength of her character, something we felt was crucial for players to respect her. Her relationship with Eli was a core driver of the player's motivations, so it was important that players liked her and wanted to help her. We also wanted to contrast the warmth and camaraderie between the players' allies against the hostilities of Breen and the Combine, inspiring a sense of righteous indignation in the players for the battles ahead.
Come on, Gordon. We don't have time to fool around. Get your suit on. Well, Gordon, I see your HEV suit still fits you like a glove. At least, the glove parts do. I've made a few modifications, but I'll just acquaint you with the essentials. Now, let's see. The Mark V Hazardous Environment suit has been redesigned for comfort and utility. Oh dear.
Doc, we don't have time for this. At least get that suit juiced up, Gordon.
Good idea. There's a charger on the wall. I've modified your suit to draw power from Combine energy outlets, which are plentiful wherever they patrol.
Meanwhile, let's get this show on the road.
Gordon, why don't you position yourself near the panel over there and wait for my word?
Isaac, are you there?
Yes, Eli. Bit of a holdup on this end. You'll never guess who found his way into our lab this morning.
That's not who I think it is it?
Indeed it is, and it's our intention to send him packing straight away in the company of your lovely daughter.
Are you ready for us, Dad?
You're all set on this end.
Then let's do it.
Let's see. The massless field flux should self-limit, and I've clamped the manifold parameters to CR base and LT orbifold, Hilbert inclusive. Conditions could hardly be more ideal.
That's what you said last time.
Hey, yeah, about that cat.
Initializing in 3, 2, 1. No, fiddlesticks. What now?
Doctor, the plug.
Dear me, you're right. Gordon, would you mind plugging us in?
Scene interactivity. At certain points in our choreo scenes, we require the player to take action. Beyond simply giving them something to do and keeping them engaged, these moments served a few key purposes. First, they allowed the player to catch up even if they'd been distracted by something else in the environment. The scene could safely pause until the player completed the task, ensuring they were back and paying attention. At the same time, it let us position the player where we needed them, which was useful for framing the scene and making sure they saw something important. In some cases, we got double value out of these moments by using them to train the player. Here, they're learning to interact with plugs and sockets, a skill they'll need for puzzles later in the game.
Excellent.
You gonna let Gordon throw the switch?
Gordon, go right ahead. Very good. Final sequence. Commencing now.
I can't look.
Okay.
Well, did it work?
See for yourself.
Hey, Doc.
Thank goodness. My relief is almost palpable.
Fantastic work, Izzy.
Well, I can't take all the credit. Dr. Freeman proved an able assistant.
Let's go ahead and bring Gordon through now.
Right you are. Speak to you again in a few moments.
Good job, Gordon. Throwing that switch and all. I can see your MIT education really pays for itself.
All right, Barney. Your turn.
Gee, thanks.
Gordon, as soon as you're in position, we'll send you to Eli's.
And not a moment too soon.
Alyx's kiss. It's a small moment, but Alyx's kiss on Eli's cheek was important. Eventually, we're going to ask the player to save Eli, and we want them to care about him. To build that emotional connection, we needed to show the warmth and affection between Alyx and Eli. We didn't want to oversell it with dialogue or make it too big of an event. It had to feel genuine, not performative. and we were able to iterate on the subtleties of this moment until it struck just the right note.
Chamber, Gordon.
Monitors. We use monitors a lot for storytelling in Half-Life 2 in the episodes, so much so that we even make fun of ourselves for it. The problem is they're just too damn useful. They're fantastic for expanding the world by showing events happening elsewhere, and they provide an easy way to have characters talk without needing to explain how they all got to the player's location. Anyone who's ever written any kind of story, especially one with an ensemble cast, understands the unique frustration of trying to create natural reasons for all of your characters to come together in the same place. In this case, we were really happy with how the monitor allowed Alyx to teleport away and then quickly appear in Eli's lab, making everything feel real and connected.
Gordon, get a move on. Excellent. Initializing in 3, 2, 1. Barney, if you'd be so kind.
Good luck out there, Gordon.
Yes, indeed. We're ready to project you, Gordon. Bon voyage, and best of luck in your future endeavors. Final sequence. The hell? What is it?
It's your pet, the freaking headhopper!
Lamar, ready?
No!
There he is! Is Lamar with him? Forget about that thing!
Coming through, Dad. What's going on? I'm not sure. It seems to be some kind of interference.
Gordon, stay put. You'll get you out of there.
Something is drawing him away.
What's the meaning of this? Who are you? How did you get in here?
I'm getting him out of there. Head up way into the field. It will peel you apart!
Just lost Gordon. What's going on?
I wish I knew. I'm encountering unexpected interference.
Don't worry, Gordon.
There he is. Oh, we're losing it again.
The man I saw. I'm all but certain it was Gordon Freeman. He didn't come through.
Then where is he?
Behind you. Shut it down. Shut it down.
Gordon, you must get out of here. Get down out of sight. I'll come find you.